open session, we will start out with a discussion of pensions. Then we'll have a panel of 7, as I told you before, 7 different points of view from 7 major principals in each of the areas they represent and present their point of view. After that's over, we'll have one last speaker talking about public schools and the need for them. Ryan, would you?
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Jensen. I work for the Pennsylvania Economy League of Southwestern Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Economy League is a nonprofit research and consulting organization. We work statewide and are involved primarily in research and consulting to improve local government throughout Pennsylvania to promote better economic development. And I am here to talk about pensions and, I'm sorry? I can't, so okay. Local government pension distress in Pennsylvania is a horrendous problem, and I'm going to spend the next 15-20 minutes talking about the larger issue of pension problems in Pennsylvania, and then focusing specifically on school district pension problems. As I mentioned, the Pennsylvania Economy League is primarily interested in economic development, in promoting a better environment for our businesses to operate in Pennsylvania. And as we see it at the Economy League, pension distress is one of the key problems that we face in Pennsylvania. If we do not have a strong, solidly funded pension environment in Pennsylvania, the entire structure of Pennsylvania's economic competitiveness really falls apart. And just a little bit of background, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but I think it's always instructive to take a look at what Pennsylvania's local government environment really consists of. And what it consists of is a very, very highly decentralized system of local government. So if you take a look at the chart here, you'll see that only the state of Illinois has more local governments than Pennsylvania. What I've done here is added up the number of municipalities in blue, the number of authorities and special districts in yellow, the number of school districts in red, and then finally counties in green. And you see that Pennsylvania is second in the United States. And the part of the world that I operate in, southwestern Pennsylvania, around Pittsburgh, we operate in a 10-county district area in southwestern Pennsylvania. And our 10 counties alone in southwestern Pennsylvania have more local governments than 22 states across the United States. So we're, Pennsylvania is first in several areas, and local government is one of the areas where we really excel. And one of the consequences of this high degree of fragmentation, while it gives us a great amount of access to our elected officials and to the levers of government, it also tends to create regions which have some financial problems because they don't have the wherewithal, the large populations and large areas in which to overcome certain financial problems. For example, in Pennsylvania, we have 26 municipalities which have been declared Act 47 municipalities. Most recently, we've seen Harrisburg and Reading in this area go under Act 47. That's the state's distressed municipalities financial program. Only 6 municipalities since the 1980s have emerged from financial distress once they've gone into it. But Act 47 isn't the only way to measure financial distress. We also have pension distress across the Commonwealth. We have other programs in Pennsylvania. We have an early intervention program, which allows us to be more proactive about our financial problems. When you take a look at all those different ways of measuring distress, and you put it up on a map like this, I think of this as the measles map. I think of Pennsylvania as a state with not just financial stress as I imagined it was when I first moved to Pennsylvania 25 years ago, as primarily a problem in our old industrial areas, the Mon Valley, for example, in Allegheny County, or the Lehigh Valley up in the Northeast, but we really have financial stress throughout the Commonwealth. And much of this stress is related to pension problems. And one other thing to sort of set the table and provide more context to the problem of financial stress is the large number of people who are affected by financial stress. When you take a look at Act 47 municipalities, those municipalities where there is pension distress, those municipalities that are in the early intervention program, or other municipalities which are financially stressed but simply haven't made the official declaration for Act 47, we find that 40% of Pennsylvanians live in one of those municipalities. That's a very large population, which really is a threatened population going forward. I had mentioned that pension stress is one of the biggest problems that we have in Pennsylvania. And if you take a look at this map, you'll see again that our pension stress is really a problem throughout Pennsylvania. It's not just a Philadelphia problem. It's not just a Pittsburgh problem. It's not just a Harrisburg problem, but it really is throughout the Commonwealth. And as we think about municipal pension stress, we also have to think in terms of school district pension stress, because our school district pensions are paid for not just by the state government, but also through local costs. And I will get to that in 1 minute. One last thing I wanted to provide here in terms of how bad things can get. City of Pittsburgh, where I work, we are now at a point where our police pension plan has just $23 in the bank for the $100 that are due towards our pensions. 23% funded is an extremely low number. In most cases, most experts in the field would like to see the number at least at 70%, if not 80% or higher. And the consequences of not doing anything about this is further financial degradation of our localities. We've got the city of Philadelphia with almost $5 billion in unfunded liabilities, Pittsburgh, $700 million, and throughout the rest of the Commonwealth, $1.4 billion in unfunded liabilities. This is just the municipal end of the spectrum. The consequences of this are either reductions in services or higher taxes. And that is also going to play out on the school district level, where we also have a significant problem. Pennsylvania, as I said, is a very fragmented state in terms of how we do most of our local government. Our pension system in the municipalities is defragmented, is fragmented, is decentralized. So we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 different pension plans. School districts, however, have a statewide pension plan, and it is overseen by PSERS. And PSERS has been around since 1917. It's really essentially a Commonwealth agency or a Commonwealth related agency. It's a very large system, 500,000 beneficiaries in the system. Big system, which is in quite a bit of trouble. With the decline in the stock market several years ago, there were some major hits naturally in most pension plans across the United States, but there were also some policy decisions that previous General Assemblies had made, which created quite a financial problem, which was eventually going to come due. And finally, the chickens did come home to roost, and we finally began to look at this situation where by 2013 and 2014, we were going to see an enormous cliff in terms of our pension obligations at the school district level. So the General Assembly finally took a very serious look at this, and last year passed Act 120, and the provisions of Act 120 have basically smoothed out that huge cliff that was facing us in our Pennsylvania school districts. Monty had talked earlier about kicking the can down the road. I really think of this problem not so much as kicking the can down the road, but really it's kicking a 55-gallon drum down the road at this point. The costs are enormous, and you will see that in just a moment. Some of the things that Act 120 attempted to do, as I said, was smooth out that initial cost hit that was coming. It also re-amortized the unfunded liabilities over a longer period of time, again providing some amount of smoothing. It provided for the prohibition of pension obligation bonds, just to protect school districts that might make some bad financial decisions. But specifically in terms of cost containment, I think did some very important things, which really are not kicking the can down the road. These provisions that you see on the slide here really do go towards beginning to nip away at long-term pension costs, reducing the benefit multiplier from 2.5 to 2.0 for new employees, risk sharing where if PSERS doesn't hit its projections in the market, there is a sharing of that cost with the members of the system, increasing the retirement age to 65, prohibiting lump sum withdrawals. These are all things that over time are going to make a big difference to the obligations. But in the meantime, we have a huge problem that's facing us. You'll see on the left, in 2010, the four categories of public pensions that we deal with here in the Commonwealth. We've got SERS, which is the state employees pension system in blue. The dark green is the PSERS portion that is paid for out of state revenues. The lighter green is the school district obligation that is due at the local level for our school districts. And then finally, on top of that is the municipal unfunded liability. Altogether, the number is $30.4 billion, but by 2021, we're going to see that amount more than double, goes up to just about $72 billion. And of that, a huge portion of that falls on us at the local level, but very importantly, the state also has these huge obligations, so we won't have Harrisburg being very receptive to helping out local municipalities and school districts as they look for ways to fund their own obligations. And what does this mean in terms of doing some budgeting on an annual basis if you're a school district business manager trying to figure out how you're going to pay the bill? It's not a very pretty scenario, obviously. If you take a look at 2010, right now the local share of only the school district portion of the problem, $277 million is now the ARC, the annual required contribution for the pension plans. You'll see over time this escalation. That's what Act 120 did. It made a gradual escalation through about 2015. And then more of a leveling out that goes on for many, many, many years. Without Act 120, again, I want to emphasize that 2014 number would be much, much higher. We would have hit this immediate cliff and immediately school districts would have had to come up with tremendous amounts of money. So it did buy a little bit of time. It provided for a little better planning to get around that crisis that's coming. But the big problem is the length of time and the sheer magnitude of what is owed and what is going to have to be paid. Unlike in the private sector, there is no way to get out from under the pension obligations in the public sector. In the public sector, we're not covered by ERISA law, so those costs that are out there, they're obligated, they have to be paid at some point. And I think about my daughter, who's 11 years old, she's in 5th grade. She was born in 1999. And by the time she's 40 years old, she's still going to be paying on these obligations that were incurred years ago, years before she was even born. And I wonder if she's going to be able to live in Pennsylvania where she's going to be able to afford a house, is she going to be able to afford property taxes? I have some real concerns about where this takes Pennsylvania in terms of its competitiveness. But again, we can't get out from underneath this. The chickens have come home to roost, and we're going to have to pay for it somehow. It's going to take a lot of bullet biting coming up in the future. And again, on top of that, we have municipal pension obligations, which only exacerbate the problem. And then finally, I just wanted to take this just a little bit closer to home here for you all in Lancaster County. The ultimate payer of these are you who are homeowners, any of us who pay real estate and earned income taxes. Take a look at those contributions in 2010 and compare them in your school district to what you're going to be paying just 5 years down the road. And then take a look at that on the basis of you as a homeowner. Assuming you have a $200,000 home in Lancaster School District, $124 of your current obligations in real estate taxes go towards pensions. In just 5 years, those are going to go up to $549. That's just in 5 years. That's not the peak of that. Whoops. That's not the peak of that previous curve, right? So we have some real problems ahead of us in the area of pension payments. And I just want to leave you with just a couple of additional thoughts on how we might begin to address these problems. We have done some of this through Act 120, but we still have many problems on the municipal pension end of the equation. We still need better cost controls. We need longer vesting periods. We need longer periods of actually working in a system before you should be able to have benefits paid to you. Increasing the retirement age, perhaps going from age 50 for garbage collection workers in the city of Pittsburgh, perhaps up to as high as 55 years of age. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me, but so far we haven't been able to get that. And those are state rules. It's not something that the city of Lancaster can do on its own. It's not something that a city of Pittsburgh can do on its own, or a city of Harrisburg can do on its own. Most of these rules are dictated by the General Assembly in Harrisburg. So we're going to need solutions at the state in order to get these things taken care of. Additionally, not permitting any benefit enhancements unless you're essentially fully funded. Authorizing optionally defined contribution plans for municipalities and for school districts. There are some supplemental benefits that are provided, but you can't simply switch out a defined benefit plan with a defined contribution plan in order to provide for beneficiaries long-term retirements not provided in state law. Those are some real ball and chains that we have in Pennsylvania, which is creating this financial crisis that is ahead of us. So with that, I thank you, and we'll go on to the next speakers.
Good afternoon. As the panel is getting settled in, let me start. I'm Tom Gutsy, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. I want to thank the Hourglass for the invitation and for a really informative session. I want to just comment on a few of the things that have been said, and I'll start with the pension issue. This is a huge problem. I think everybody knows it. The reference to cans and roads, I think, is probably a little outdated, as was mentioned. We need to understand, as was pointed out, there is a huge unfunded liability, but it has to be addressed. And so there's no simple solution. I think if there were, it would be addressed a long time ago. Some legislators, Scott Boyd and others, have been talking about this. The legislation that just passed, I think, is a significant step. It is the first time in the 30 years I've been at PSBA that any major effort is made to control those pension costs and actually to reduce benefits going forward. But that doesn't mean the unfunded liability is retired. It just helps to ease the burden slightly. I think fundamental reform is needed. PSBA's proposed legislation to do that, a hybrid kind of defined benefit, defined contribution. We hope that conversation continues. As Samuel Johnson once famously said, nothing focuses the mind like a pending execution. And sometimes just, closer. Too close and I'll sing my way. You don't I'll try this again. As Samuel Johnson said, nothing focuses the mind like a pending execution. And sometimes it takes for the legislature and for all of us collectively, I think, to address issues because they are that serious that we really don't have a choice. And I think we're at that point. But let me just say in a more historical context, going back to the founding, I think, of the public school system in 1834, one thing has been consistent since then, and that is there has always been a state and local partnership for public education and a tension between state and local government. And almost any issue I can think of that we've dealt with in my career at PSBA can be framed that way. It has to do with how much the state do, how much control do local school districts have. And I think we can assume, for the sake of today's discussion, that there is culpability on all sides in terms of decisions that were made. Some not particularly well informed, but others, I think, that were made in the best interest of students and taxpayers at the time they were made. I'm concerned about the burdens, as Monty we talked about earlier, of some of the mandates that are in place. PSBA has proposed a whole series of bills to ease the burden of mandates on public school districts, many of them dealing with the topics that were discussed earlier. There's something about mandates, though, and that is every one that was ever enacted, whether through legislation or the regulatory process, has some advocates standing there to support it. And any effort to deal with that mandate is going to generate opposition from that group that's supporting what they managed to get enacted. But as was pointed out, and I agree completely, among the mandate rulings we're talking about is we have to look at the rules that we're operating under. They simply don't fit the school system that we need in the future. There needs to be more discretion on the part of local officials to actually manage their school systems. And I would ask those from the business community who are here today, how many of you could effectively manage your business if, for example, you operated on a rule that said you can't furlough your professional employees for economic reasons. We're not calling for massive layoffs, but we are calling for the opportunity to make those kinds of decisions. But the other thing I would suggest is that all legislators and the governor who's coming in, and maybe all of us, kind of collectively take the Hippocratic Oath. And that, I mean, we first of all shouldn't do any more harm. Should make matters worse. And I worry sometimes about the proposals that I see to do that. I'll give you just a couple of examples. The tuition voucher plan that's being proposed, first of all, I think is clearly unconstitutional, but beyond that, it would drain money from public schools. And then there are proposals to expand the number of charter schools. This fascinates me. We've done a study on charter schools in this state, and we've looked at studies from around the country. We are not opposed to charter schools. Many of our districts have voluntarily chartered them. But the notion that we simply need to have more of them really flies in the face of the data, which shows that most of the charter schools who have already been created are not outperforming public schools. In fact, many of them are doing much worse. It reminds me of what somebody told me once. They had a client who made automobile batteries, and they figured out that they were losing about 10 cents on every battery they sold. And the answer was to sell more batteries. Now, you wouldn't do that in business, and I think we have to ask ourselves the question, what are the practices and programs that work? How can we make them better? And let's not make matters worse in the meantime. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Jim Testerman. I'm a teacher from the Central York School District. I taught high school biology and 7th grade life science. I'm on leave right now as the elected president of the Pennsylvania State Education Association. We represent about 191,000 public education employees, the custodians, the secretaries, the school nurses, the classroom teachers, the aides, cafeteria workers, you name it, we represent them. And we're all very, very keenly aware of the economic storm that's coming our way. And you just need to look no further than the November election to realize that a lot of the less government mantra that we were hearing, many people think it means less of the government I don't like, but not of the government I do like. And public schools are government. And as we're looking at an age where we're going to be having less government in Pennsylvania because of the lack of resources, we expect that there are going to be layoffs. We expect that there are going to be program cuts. And we expect that probably the children who struggle the most to learn, who need interventions and services that are on the cutting block, like full-day kindergarten, will be hurt the most. And you cannot walk away from that when you cut back those things. I know as a professional myself and the people I represent, we're going to work very hard at trying to do more with less. But each cut comes with consequences. When I was looking at the presentation about the cut on the arts, it might seem very easy, let's eliminate elementary art. Well, if you look statistically, attendance is higher on those classes on the days that they have elementary art because the kids love to come for that. And then you get them for the rest of the day in learning as well. So we just have to be very, very realistic about what we're doing in the schools. I also think we need to recognize that Pennsylvania, albeit not perfect, does a very, very good job. And for the resources that we're currently spending, 82% of our school districts made adequate yearly progress last year, which is the federal measure of school success. Our reading scores on NAEP, only 6 states at the 4th grade level scored higher than Pennsylvania, and no state scores statistically higher on the 6th grade reading test in Pennsylvania. And I could go on through a bunch of other scores, but if you look at not just state scores, but the NAEP, National Education Assessment of Progress, Pennsylvania is doing a very, very good job with its resources. We still have a lot of work to do, especially for students who struggle to be successful, and it's no coincidence that students who are struggling to be successful, on average, are typically in communities that are struggling to provide the familiar supports and the social supports that some of those families that are struggling to put a roof over their head need to be successful. So we need to take time to recognize that Pennsylvania is doing a good job with the resources they've provided and with the investment in things like full-day kindergarten over the last couple of years. We know if you get the kids earlier and get them ready for 1st grade, their whole career is going to be much better for them, and learning for those without learning disabilities is going to be much easier for them. So I think we really need to be cognizant of that. You can't not be in this room, especially represent people who work in our public schools, and not talk about the pension issue. I've made presentations like the one you just saw, except that I also add another graph that shows what the state and school districts and the employees have been contributing over time. And as an employee, I've been contributing 7.5%, and it's not that long ago that the PCERS fund was 100% funded when the markets were booming. We have come off a decade where we had 2 recessions, one the worst since the Depression, and that's had a huge hit on the actuarial losses that we see there. PCERS just reported a 14% return on investment in this last period. So as the economy continues to recover, I think some, but clearly not all, of that obligation is going to be made up by the increases in the market. I also want to acknowledge the hard work that was done in the legislature on Act 120. PSEA worked with a lot of other unions to pass Act 120, which provided some significant changes. We understood that changes were necessary and worked really, really hard to put in place a secure pension. Right now, the average pensioner in Pennsylvania in the PCERS system collects about $23,000. They're not getting rich off of their pensions. And he already went through some of the significant changes that were made. But let's also not forget the long-term implications of things like pensions. People who don't have the money to retire and then reach retirement age and rely on the social safety net in the state of Pennsylvania, those costs will soon come home to roost in Pennsylvania. The conversation should be not how we take away from one, but how do we lift everybody up to make sure they have a safe and secure and dignified retirement so they don't have to rely on the social safety net during their retirement. And also, plans like the PCERS Pension Fund, they invest in businesses and startups. So they are an economic vehicle that I think we need to remember as well, and they typically return about $10 on economic impact for each dollar that's invested in the plans. I did have to take note of some of the change the rules conversations, and we probably do need to talk about changing the rules. No surprise, I probably want to change different ones than you do, but I do want to set the record straight on a couple things. The tenure law in Pennsylvania for public school employees allows someone to be fired for 5 reasons, one of which is incompetence. I've sat in many meetings as a local president where someone has been counseled out of the profession. I've sat in meetings where they've been put on improvement plans, and I've been in meetings where they have been terminated. Yes, the administrator must document their work, and it is time consuming, but I think if we're going to put in place a just termination provision, we would want, if someone's going to lose their livelihood, to make sure that we have due process involved in that. People too often confuse public school tenure with college tenure in the state of Pennsylvania. That just is not so. As far as someone being trapped in the profession, I think you can link that directly to we need a really good clinical supervision model of evaluation in Pennsylvania. That means you're going to have to free up administrators to have the time to do really good supervision and pre-conference and post-conference. And we need supports for new teachers and struggling teachers. I'll be the first one to say we do in this state a very poor job of investing in our new talent and in trying to remediate folks who are struggling. That's something you want to talk about, changing the rules. Let's talk about how we do that in a meaningful way. Because at no point in time do I ever want to be accused of keeping a bad teacher in a classroom. That's not what this should be about. We should be trying to make sure that the best teacher is in that classroom. And if you want to attract and retain the best, and especially they talk about maybe paying people more to work in certain places, if you want me to work in a school where students are struggling to succeed, make it exactly like the wealthy school district down the road. Give me the same resources, the same safety, the same discipline, and by and large, I know teachers love to work with kids who are struggling to be successful. To be perfectly honest, their parents call you less, and you actually have time to really innovate and spend. I'm serious. I've taught the academic kids and the kids who were waiting just to get out of high school and enter the world of work. So it's really, really, I think you do some of your best teaching when you're working with kids who are struggling. And certification rules, I would definitely disagree because I have the content knowledge, just not know mean that I know how to deliver that content knowledge. There is something to be said with learning how to deliver content to kids in a meaningful way so that you can be driving the bus in that classroom and running through all the curriculum, but it doesn't mean the kids are on the bus unless you know how to check to make sure that they are learning as you go and that you go back the next day and pick up those kids who didn't quite get it. And lastly, on the professional day, I don't know a teacher who doesn't work a professional day. Yes, there's usually a contractual day that says when you have to be there to engage kids and be available for meetings, but you drive past parking lots where teachers are there at 6 o'clock at night, or sometimes, yep, they may leave right at the end of the day, go home, pick up their kids, engage in their kids, and then when they put their kids to bed, they're doing 2-3 hours of planning or correcting or getting ready for that next day. So if in fact you have someone who is not getting the job done, that's a conversation that needs to be had with the administrator in that building. But my experience has been, and I was one of those teachers, I'm not a morning person, so I did walk in right when things started in the morning. I'd be there till 6 o'clock at night because I was better then, but not a morning person. Would meet my students and their parents on a Sunday night for science projects because there wasn't enough time in the week. There are a lot of people out there who work really hard in our schools, and too often they get labeled with our image of some of those teachers. It's very, very different being in front of that classroom and delivering instruction than it was when you were sitting on the other side of that. And our schools are very different, and I'll close on this. I'm very, very proud that we live in a country that every child, even those with disabilities, is afforded the best that we have to offer. But that comes at a price, financially, and for the work that is done in our schools to make sure they get as much of an opportunity. I have a niece who has a disease that results in non-cancerous tumors on her brain. I'm glad I live in a society that helps her mother lift that child up and put her in special programs so that she can reach her full potential, whatever that is going to be. I want to thank you for having me here today.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to speak with you today. I wake up each and every morning very excited about it. I can honestly say to you that I do love my occupation. It is always rewarding to see the students walking into my office in the morning just to say hello and or check in. On a weekly basis, a group of us sit down and talk and reflect on what has or is going on in life. We always start off with saying something positive that is happening in our lives, or about school, or about a peer. When students leave my office and classroom with a smile, I know that my positive energy has influenced them. I am a special education teacher at J.P. McCaskey High School in the school district of Lancaster, and this is my 5th year. Along with my teaching duties, I am also a SAP team member. I'm the advisor of the senior class, the cultural day, the cooking and baking club, and an active member of faculty council. I have the privilege of mentoring upcoming teachers. As one of my student teachers stated to me last year, as a teacher, you are also a mentor to the students, not only related to school, but with their own personal lives, because she feels as though no problem is too big or too small, therefore should not go unnoticed. If the students' basic needs are not being met, then teaching is not occurring. It is our job to meet the individual needs of each student and to implement the modifications and accommodations that are necessary to ensure that every child can and will be successful. Teaching is a noble and viable and very demanding occupation. It requires patience, knowledge, understanding, and a desire to help others. Unfortunately, it is often underappreciated and undervalued by many societal standards. As a teacher in urban education, we have students who are academically achieving and who are eligible for school scholarships, such as a current student who has just received a full ride to Yale. Diversity is all around us on a daily basis, which makes our district very unique. We have students who are actively engaged in the school, such as student government, sports, clubs, and music. The majority of our students have a true bond to the school, and when you have this label as a school in crisis, it doesn't support what is really going on internally. Piloting a block schedule is a positive example of an intervention that I have been involved in. Schools are expected to take care of much more now than they have in the past. We as teachers are on the front line on a daily basis. We are positive role models for our students. Even though at times things don't always work out as planned, I look at a new day as another opportunity for the student to get on the path of success. We as teachers are and need to be strong advocates for our students. If we don't speak up, then who will? Many times people ask me why. Why did I get into the profession of teaching? And this poem written last year by one of my seniors explains it. I want to be like you, Mrs. Esch. Thank you, Mrs. Esch, for being my life's role model. When I consider all you've taught me, academics and life skills, I want to be like you. Smart, interesting, and engaging, always finding the positives in our lives and confident. I want to be like you, well-informed and easy to understand, thinking with your heart as well as your head, nudging us to do our best and always pushing us to our limits. I never really understood the true meaning of why you held such high expectations, but now I can say thank you because you have taught me responsibility. I want to be like you, giving your time to others, energy, and talent to ensure the brightest possible future for each of us. Thank you for giving me a goal to shoot for. Thank you for pushing me when I was slacking, as I was the first in my family to walk the stage at graduation. All others gave up on me, but you were my rock from my freshman year through my senior year. I want to be like you, and of course, wear heels like you too. And I do have heels on today. Thanks for always believing in me, you made a difference. This poem could also hold true for many of my colleagues in our profession. And I'd like to end with this. We all have rough days here and there, so a group of us at McCaskey have come up with this lovely motto to help us remind us of why we do what we do. Students at McCaskey, awesome. Teaching at McCaskey, rewarding. Watching your students walk across the stage at graduation, priceless. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Rowan, and I am a board member of the Hourglass Foundation and also a board member of the School District of Lancaster. I also serve off of Lancaster and the CTC as the current president of their board. And I have a couple thoughts I'd like to express. I want to thank everyone for coming. Deciding to come for a whole afternoon talking about school pensions is not the most exciting thing I can think of doing in an afternoon, but I appreciate everyone coming. About a year and a half ago, the Hourglass Foundation decided that the pending, what we saw as the pension crisis that would be happening shortly, was one of the main things that could affect life in Lancaster County. And we decided that it was significant enough that we should take it on as a challenge and see what effect the Hourglass could have on this. Monty Milner, who was basically leading the charge, looked to me and said, "You're a school board member, so you're going to help us with this." We went off on spending a year or so, which is culminating with what we're doing here today. And Monty touched upon earlier when we talked about the silos that everyone is in. And I think sitting here, you are seeing the silos that we've been talking about all day. We're going directly from the teacher now to the school board member, superintendent, to then Harrisburg down there, or up there. And I think from listening to a different, that's a compliment, our different perspectives, you can see how it's easy for everyone wants to tell you our perspective on this. And when we did our research, we found out this is nuts. I mean, everyone keeps going on saying the same rhetoric, but we are on, this train is running off its tracks. And what we did was we got 4 school districts together. They were very diverse, different districts in Lancaster County, and we've been working very closely with them to be able to bring you this forum. Deliberately, the 4 school districts were different demographics. We went from the least wealthy, which means poorest, to the richest. And it's amazing how many similarities there really are in the districts. And what struck me is in Lancaster County, with our 16 different districts, the school district of Lancaster, which I represent, is basically bankrupt at this point. Whether we like it or not, it is. We have 3 years until the wealthiest school district is bankrupt. So this is a situation that hits everybody. It is the Hempfield, it is Manheim Township, it is Penn Manor, it's everybody. And the best, the wealthiest district with the biggest money in the bank and margins is 3 years, and it's all over. So we're out of time on this. This is not something we can look at charts and graphs and keep nodding our heads and hoping something's going to happen. And as Monty says, the tooth fairy is not going to come. As a school board member, what I wanted to do was to be able to humanize it a little bit for you and let you know, most school board members, we're not professionals as far as being school board members. We're ordinary people who have some reason that we want to be on the board. We run for election, we get elected, and here we are. What terrifies me right now is most school board members in Pennsylvania are not really aware of what's happening. They just don't get it. They're looking at their budgets and they're trained to think that Harrisburg is going to come through with more money. Of course there's going to be a couple more million here or there. They wouldn't do this to us. But I think this time around it's very different. And one point that I would like to make, and it's sort of alluding to what you were talking about earlier, but what I'm afraid of, in Pennsylvania, the average teacher's starting salary is around $20,000, give or take. Most of them make it up to around $60,000. If you get into administration or something else, you may bump up to around $90,000. The pension at this point of a teacher who's worked the full term and had the calculator working at the the $60,000 range will end up with a pension of $30,000 to $40,000 for life. If you get up to $90,000, your pension is closer to $60,000 for life. In the private sector, most people who are lucky enough to have a 401k plan may have $100,000 in that plan. Most people, when they're retired, living off 401ks, may have $200,000 in that plan. To have the equivalent of a $60,000 a year pension, you have to have about $1.5 million in a 401k. When the average person who is not a public employee, who is not a teacher, starts to understand those numbers and sees how their savings have been decimated, they are not going to be in a mood to pay higher taxes and to support 1/6 of the population. That is the part that really gets me afraid. Because the teachers who do work hard, who do their job well, my fear is they're going to be vilified. You are going to start hearing more and more letters to the editor. My God, they're making this, they're getting this. They didn't do this. They are part of the system that has created this for them. My position is that the whole pension situation is not sustainable. We can talk about smoothing, we can talk about how it's going to be fine, but it's not. Because in between the smoothing and it being fine, you have school board members. You have people like me, and I consider myself an average school board member. I go home at night, I have neighbors all around me who know me, who are my friends, right behind me is a teacher. When we are faced with possibly 20% cuts in our budgets, which is quite frankly what we're looking at in Lancaster right now, it is easier for your average school board director to just tell the superintendent and the business manager, go find us $5–10 million. I don't care what you do, go find it. Than it is for them to go back to their neighbor and say, by the way, I just doubled and tripled your taxes, and in 3 to 4 years it goes up again. Just put yourself in that position. It's not going to happen. So you follow that scenario through, and you start to see those type of massive cuts in a school system. You go back to what we were touching upon right before break, how school systems function and how school systems are able to make cuts or make changes. Everywhere we turn, we are blocked. We don't operate like a business, and I own a business, so I understand if I don't make every year $1 more than I spend, I am quickly out of business. It doesn't help stay in business. Schools and public and government is different, but you do reach a point where you run out of money. And I think the federal government, the state governments, the local governments are out of money. There isn't any more. We're done. So what I believe we have to do, and why I'm proud to be part of what the Hourglass is attempting to do, is to have this forum create thought processes. All of you absorb all of this, absorb what everyone has said, and go back and think about it. If the ironic part right now, and we do live in a politically charged environment, we have a new, very Republican administration in Quebec who ran on a no-tax pledge. The irony about politics a lot of times is it can come full circle, I believe. And what is a strong Democratic idea or Republican, when you take everything away, it can be the same idea. We are now pushing very hard. There's a bill that's being presented right now that's really pushing for charter schools, school choice, and basically getting kids out of public school into private school. The fundamental difference between those schools is, one, they don't have the union restrictions that we have, they don't have the hiring and firing restrictions we have, and they don't have the litany of rules that public schools have to operate under. So if you go back and think, what if you freed up the public schools? What if you gave them, really allowed them to flourish, allowed them more flexibility? I firmly believe, I heard what you said, but I do not believe tenure has a place in public high school. I'm sorry, but I'm talking now as a board member. And I think we need to, you've seen today, I think, a lot of human people. You've seen superintendents talk, you've seen very energized people who are smart people who want to try and solve this problem, but we need to let them do it. And the one thing that is for sure, if we don't change anything, if schools continue being this monolithic government entity that is totally tied down and cannot function properly, then they will fail. It is a prophecy that will come true. Schools will fail on the path they are on right now because they're going to run out of money. They will be pulling the better kids and the more able family kids with parents out of those schools, and then it's going to be even more of a disaster than we have now. So my message to you is to try and understand the problem we have, think about it. My hope is that we can take this nucleus that we have right here in Lancaster County, and maybe it's something we can turn into a statewide initiative. And I think we are very lucky to have members from Harrisburg here who are sitting down and talking to us, and have been for quite a while, in a very open, engaging way. And I compliment them on that. That if we can be working with Harrisburg and see what we can do to go forward. So, and it's getting late today, so I'll stop. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Frick. I'm superintendent of Lampter-Strasburg School District, and I was asked by the Hourglass Foundation to kind of late on in the process of developing today's forum to speak because it was said, since I'll be retiring as of June 30, 2011, you can speak your mind and not offend anybody or worry about offending anybody. So I am going to offend people, no question about that, but not by my intent of doing that. What they didn't really know is, had I had 10 years yet to go in the profession, I would not change my remarks. I've been very blessed to have been in the school district for the last 45 years, from a teacher, actually from a student teacher through now superintendent for the last 15. And I've been blessed with a board and people that I've had the chance to work for and with that always encouraged me to share my ideas. I hope that what I was going to share with you was going to be pure fiction, but after reading the press release from Senator Piccola's office yesterday on school choice, which I know the new governor is very much behind, I don't believe this is fiction at all. I believe this is going to be fact. Hardest thing for me on a panel like this is not to respond to the people that have spoken before you, because they have such good ideas, and you say, yeah, but what about this? So anyway, I'll stick with my script. It's my belief that progressing the way that we are, public education will cease to exist within the very near future. I mean that. I believe that. It will cease to exist. Thus today, I present to you an obituary for public education. Dearly beloved, we gather today to celebrate the life of our dear departed friend, public education. Born in 1834 with the passage of the Free School Act of Pennsylvania, public education was created and sustained through the combined parental efforts of Thomas Henry Burroughs and Thaddeus Stevens. Those who knew him in his early years were inspired by the opportunities that public education provided to all persons, regardless of their wealth or social class. Countless immigrants from many nations benefited from his egalitarian influences. At that time, of course, America was viewed as the great melting pot, and public education was the vehicle that could enable the person of the most humble means to achieve the loftiest of dreams. In his later years, America was viewed more as a salad bowl, where each human ingredient wished to maintain its distinct and ethnically diverse identity. Originally, Public education drew its instructors from a similar pool as the clergy, people who saw themselves as being called to their respective professions. At that time, even though wages were meager and accompanying fringe benefits were non-existent, those who delivered instruction were respected and looked up to by those in the community in which they served. Their dedication to the children that they served was beyond question. First housed in basic brick structures, public education in rural America functioned in one-room buildings including all 8 grades, while its citified cousins operated in multi-room egg crate-style edifices, most often having 1 room per grade level. But whether in rural or urban format, public education, as believed and touted by Thomas Jefferson, was a fundamental requirement for the establishment and the maintenance of a democracy. The mainstays of the curriculum were to be reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. Unfortunately for public educators, reformers such as Horace Mann moved to use schools for a system of social control, an effort that is still in effect today. Schools changed from an organization to promote learning to one that was assigned to repair all social maladies. Public education's demise is attributable to a number of causes, and in his later years he would have been unrecognizable to his parents. He actually died in increments. The first affliction that he suffered was change in focus. Following World War II and the economic recovery the United States experienced following the Great Depression of the previous decade, the states began to make major upgrades to the respective educational systems. Consolidations were required, and new buildings were built. Hot lunch programs, a student transportation system, and extracurricular programs were incorporated into almost all school systems. Moreover, schools became places where physical examinations and dental examinations were given, and polio and other vaccinations were administered. Like Horace Mann's hopes, the main directive of school morphed from the educating of children to focusing on molding and improving society. Reformers viewed it as an excellent place to inculcate socially desirable practices, like giving to the Red Cross, starting a savings account, buying and selling Christmas seals, or contributing to find a cure for tuberculosis. Since the young people of the American society were a captive audience, and since a very high percentage of our citizens of tomorrow attended public schools, it seemed a great plan. Public education, however, was now unable to focus totally on its initial directive, the education of children. The second affliction that he suffered was the involvement of the federal government. In 1957, an event occurred which caused the federal government to get involved in public education for the first time in our nation's history. According to the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution, adopted in 1791, you were all there, all powers not granted to the federal government nor prohibited to the states by the Constitution of the United States are reserved to the states or the people. Historically, this meant that public education was the sole responsibility of the individual states, giving the federal government no role in the process. However, on October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first man-made satellite, into orbit, and America panicked. The National Defense Education Act was passed less than a year later, and money was made available to schools for the improvement of teaching of mathematics and science. Just as form follows function in the world of arts, control follows money in just about everything else. 7 years later, in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Esea, which is the great-grandfather of No Child Left Behind, was passed under President Lyndon Johnson's administration. With it, the federal government became fully involved in what was formerly a responsibility of the states. This was the equivalent of assigning public education's power of attorney to the federal government. The third affliction that they suffered was turning public education into a business. In 1969, the Pennsylvania General Assembly passed Act 195, which granted collective bargaining rights to educators in the Commonwealth. And over the next 10 to 15 years, the pendulum of control swung from boards of education to teachers' unions. Strikes for higher salaries, better benefits, and the very control of school systems ensued. Under Act 195, boards were and are required to sit down with representatives from teachers' unions and negotiate salaries, fringe benefits, and working conditions, a process that is confrontational at best and hostile in its most aggressive degree. As a result, teachers have become very well paid and have benefits that make many in the private sector envious. The pension program provided for public educators in Pennsylvania is one of the best in the nation. But that benefit does not come without a significant cost. That cost has been mentioned many times today, so I won't spend any more time in that. With Act 195, the welfare of public education became dependent upon the degree of cooperation between PSEA and the over 500 local school boards, and entering the teaching profession as a calling gradually disappeared. And we have figuratively, in my view, killed the goose that laid the golden egg. The fourth affliction he suffered was the rise of special education. In 1975, the 94th Congress passed its 142nd piece of legislation that became known as the Individuals with Disability Act, IDEA. Originally passed with the stipulation that any district wishing to receive that federal funding needed to provide a free, appropriate public education. The accompanying mandates made adherence to the requirements of IDEA far from voluntary. The portion of the school district's budget that goes toward meeting the requirements of IDEA today continues to grow. At one time, the General Assembly of Pennsylvania reimbursed districts for all additional costs associated with serving special education students, but that has long since ceased. So in addition to being ill, public education was having difficulty meeting financial obligations for its own care. The fifth affliction that he suffered was the pandering to the vocal. In recent years, public education has been expected to be everything to everyone, and school boards and state and federal legislators listen to the pandering. If a small vocal group of parents want a sport or an activity that the district doesn't provide, pressure accompanied by the reminder that they are taxpayers is placed on the board to initiate it. Bowing to political pressure from their constituents or wishing to do what is politically correct, state legislators pass new laws that significantly impact upon the abilities of districts to carry out their primary mission, the educating of their respective students. The federal government, in its attempt to fix the social problems in urban areas, passed laws that negatively affect even the most rural districts, transporting private school students 10 miles beyond their district border, attempting to implement non-funded mandates, requiring prevailing wage regulations in school construction, and the recently launched provisions around race to the top are but 4 examples. The sixth and final affliction that he suffered from was the politicizing of public education. How public education has been politicized is most demonstratively illustrated by the regulations surrounding cyber charter schools. Since the passage of the Free School Act of 1834, parents in the Commonwealth have always had the right to choose to send their children to private school. Obviously, this was at the parents' expense. Some parents chose to homeschool their children, also at their own expense. Public schools exist to educate the children whose parents choose that option. Currently, school districts are responsible to pay the tuition for parents who choose to enroll their children in charter or cyber charter schools, costing even small districts a substantial piece of the budget for a private education. Charter schools and cyber schools are nothing more than a very thinly veiled voucher plan or public choice plan that some legislators have attempted to initiate for the last 20 years. Each time in the past, common sense won the day, and the effort was defeated. This time, the attempt has been better choreographed, better cloaked, and more insidious. In 2010, public education was put on life support. The only question that remained was whether he would pass away before his detractors, those responsible for his care, pulled the plug. Unfortunately, over the next few years, with the Commonwealth's paying a decreasing amount of the cost of public education's care, he was forced to slip away peacefully. Rest in peace, faithful friend. You will be missed by all, even by those whose actions or lack of actions have led to your demise. Thank you.
Speechless. I'd like to say pass. May I do that? Dr. Frick.
Listen to him.
Thank you. Dr. Frick opened his comments by going off script, and then he said he's going to go back on script, and he did. He did a great job. I'd like to go off script and stay off script. And what I'd like to do is share with you a few notes that I've taken during my brief time here. I arrived at the speakers prior to the break, so I took a couple notes. I can only share with you a few of my notes, but I'd like to do that. So number one, I'd like to say, God bless great teachers like Miss Ash. Ms. Ash, she did a great job in her presentation, and it's clear just in listening to her voice and hear her articulate that she cares and she's well vested. I'd also like to say that I have no experience in public education other than going through it. I graduated in Manhattan Township High School. My 3 kids, my wife and I have 3 children. They each went through the Warwick public school system, and we were very satisfied, very grateful for that experience. I'd also like to say thank you to the Hourglass Foundation. Monty, Michael, Art, and Jennifer and others have been in communication with me and other state elected officials in a very significant way for quite some time, and they're not going away. And I think this forum is evidence of their desire to simply place good quality information into the public square and then encourage each of us individually and then ultimately collectively to do something. So here's what I heard. I heard public and school pensions are horrific. I heard we have too many local governments. I heard Pennsylvania has over 3,000 public pension plans, many more than any other state. I heard that there's $72 billion in unfunded accrued liabilities in our pension systems, and that's just the two pension systems. I heard a crisis is coming. I heard an economic storm is brewing. I heard the crisis is now. And I also heard somebody over the break who told me that we're like a train in a tunnel, and we're in the tunnel. And it was just recently discovered there's a train coming the opposite way, and there's only a single track, and we're both motoring at a high level of speed. And they were trying to paint that picture as to try to describe the crisis that we're in. I heard that we need to take the ropes off. I heard the only viable solution is pulling together. I heard the problem, the exclusive problem, is the Pennsylvania General Assembly. Scott wants me to modify that and tell you that I heard it was only the Senate that was the Senate's a problem, the House is a solution. I heard this is nuts. The train is off the tracks. I heard that what we need in public education is a level playing field. I heard that the future of education looks nothing at all like the past, and I mean nothing. I heard new, innovative competition is here to stay. And some people in the room, some people in the education field see it as a threat, and some people can't wait to embrace it. I heard that we need a 2-year budget as opposed to a 1-year budget, and I was the author in the state senate for legislation. In the last legislative session, I'll author the same piece of legislation in the upcoming legislation to move us from a 1-year budget to a 2-year budget. It was not successful. I also was the person that introduced a bill that says we in the General Assembly, members, House and Senate, would not get paid if we don't pass a budget on time for the period in which we're deficient. We currently don't get paid when we're deficient on time, but then there's a retroactive payment to us when we do get paid. And my position is that it's our top responsibility in the Pennsylvania General Assembly to pass a balanced budget on time. So I believe in the private sector, when you don't do your primary function well, you get fired. So I think at least we in the General Assembly ought to be working without compensation if we don't do our primary responsibility on time. I heard community and family stakeholders in this educational system are not optional but essential. I heard tenure has no place in public high schools. I heard we need help from the General Assembly, from the legislature. That's assuming we'll keep one. Somebody that shared with me that we need to get rid of the General Assembly altogether. I think that's a dictatorship. I think it is. Do you want to speak into the microphone? I can't repeat that one.
I said that's what we've had for the last 8 years.
That's not on my list. But I do love sitting next to this guy. I heard children must be or students would probably be a better term, but my note is children must be the driver in the education system. So I'd like to strike children than students. I heard that we have no more money. I heard that we need innovation in the classroom, and the state is a barrier to that innovation. And that, as a member of the State General Assembly, is a very, very significant one to me. I believe it to be true. I believe that we need more innovation. I believe teachers want to innovate. I do believe the state's standing in the way. And I'm looking forward to learning more at this forum and post this forum exactly what kind of internal rules and regulations and legislation that can be passed to make that happen, allowing more innovation. I heard public school is dead as we know it. That was the obituary. I heard the rules must be changed several times. I heard if you're waiting for the General Assembly to bring a fix, you're going to be waiting a long time. I heard we should be eliminating prevailing wage. I did prime sponsor that in the Senate as well, and was unsuccessful. I heard if we can't eliminate prevailing wage, then we should increase the $25,000 cap. I also was a prime sponsor of that in the General Assembly, and that was unsuccessful. And I'll be reintroducing each of these because I still continue to believe, there's just no doubt in my mind, that they deliver value. I heard the pension system is not economically sustainable, and much more. So I don't want to continue reading my notes to you, but I did want to share, we all listen, and you know this as teaching professionals, we all listen to a presentation and then take something different away from it. So I wanted to share with you what I was taking away from some of the prior speakers. I have much more, but that's a sampling of how I condense what I hear and put it into my notes, and then ultimately find partners that desire to work cooperatively to find legislative and internal regulatory changes that we can make together to solve some of these problems. Just a couple of days ago, I was asked to chair the Senate Finance Committee as the majority chair in the State Senate. And I accepted, so I'm leaving Ag and Rural Affairs and going to the Finance Committee. I got a briefing the other day on just what all the Finance Committee does, and it's substantial. It's overwhelming. So I'm in the process of now interviewing executive director for that committee, and we will have a robust schedule. People ask me what my priorities are in that committee, and it's listen, learn, act. And I do believe in listen, learn, act. So this is the first thing I did as chairman of the Senate Ag and Rural Affairs Committee. I held 9 listening sessions around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I don't know if I'll do that yet in the Senate Finance Committee, but I'm certainly considering it. This kind of a forum where you listen to wise, vested people that are in the system is tremendously valuable. But we have to boil this complex environment down into, in my opinion, at least I do, into a few actionable items that I can do as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and something that I can do as a rank and file member. I'm immensely honored to be here. I believe that educating our young people and life learners is really the most important function of a healthy, long-term, sustainable society. So I believe we've got to be in this together. I personally I couldn't care less if you're a Republican or Democrat, if you vote or don't vote, or if you want every member of the General Assembly to take out vacation and never come home. Some of those conversations are simply a waste of time. What is really helpful is for you to come up with, offer a clearly identified problem and bring alongside of it a solution, not a solution that's based in your own vested interests, but a solution that's based in what's really good for Lancaster County, for Pennsylvania, and for the United States of America for long-term sustainability. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Good evening.
They turned it off.
They turned it off. Good evening, everyone. I hopefully will try and be very brief, and I'll try and pull a few things together here at the end. My desire is to demonstrate to you that public education is not dead, and that I'm living proof of it. Because this guy was one of my teachers when I was in elementary school at Lampter-Strasburg. And he was the superintendent of the school when both my kids went through Lampter-Strasburg, and both are, praise the Lord, gainfully employed and productive members of society. So for all of the negativity and the problems that we face, there's some tremendous work Ms. Eshea's doing, and many, many other people are doing. Monty kind of asked me to provide you with, I'm going to put this in my words, but I'm going to say, to try and give you the psychic of the current environment in Harrisburg, the legislative temperature coming into this new legislative session. And I would do that by, first of all, I just want to cite some statistics. And there's a lot of discussion about state funding for public education, how well or how poorly the state has done over some time periods. And one of the things that I would like to point out is over the last 10-year period of time, state funding for education has increased 66%, or over 60%. Today, the state of Pennsylvania, including state and local dollars, spends on average $13,270 per student educated. We're about 16th in the nation at this point in those numbers. In the last 8 years, state funding for basic ed has gone up 40%. State funding for, in total, including the new programs like accountability block grants, has increased 41%. And those, by the way, the accountability block grants were specifically put out for use for things like all-day kindergarten, quality preschool, small class sizes in grades K to 3, tutoring assistance, professional development, things that statistically we were told as legislators by the education institution that were important for the quality of education. Now, I say those things because Monty asked me to say them, all right, to kind of lay out some statistics. But it's important because I want to give you the temperature of the current legislature. The current legislature, I would suggest to you, and probably coming out of the gubernatorial office or the governor-elect's office, is don't blame us for everything. We're not the total source of the problem. In fact, I would suggest to you that behind closed doors, there's some conversations that say things like, wait a second. In fact, Act 1 was really a result of those conversations. We appropriate greater sources of revenue. One of the charts that I have here that's really interesting is this chart that shows when the state increased funding in the terms of 6, 7, 8% in that given year, you would think that school property taxes wouldn't be increased significantly. But that doesn't hold true. In fact, there's no connection. So there's this sense in the legislature that we're responsible for appropriating money, but we don't control school budgets. Now, I'm saying what the sense of the legislature is. I'm probably not going to be the most popular guy in the room, but I was asked to give you the lay of the land. And the lay of the land is that the legislature at this point, I think would you could almost sum up the taste of the legislature and the governor is enough is enough. We've got to rein in spending. We don't just have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And that's not just in public education, that's across the board. We're facing a $4 billion deficit, and we have a governor-elect who ran on a campaign pledge to say, I will not raise taxes. So, how many of you in this room think that he is going to just go back on that pledge? Okay, so we've got to figure out where to cut $4 billion. Well, those that understand our budgeting process will recognize that within our budget, the lion's share of the revenue goes to public welfare and public education, and then corrections. Public welfare, public education, I'm using round figures, please don't quote me dead on statistics, but are about $10 billion each. Corrections is another $2 billion. And then the balance goes into the various other programs. In fact, I have this chart I do at legislative breakfast that I love. It's a pie chart. And you could eliminate the entire everything else in government, but those core, and you wouldn't close the $4 billion deficit. So the legislature at this point is faced with structuring a budget to make substantive cuts. And I can assure you that every program, including us, the legislative offices, are on the table for those cuts. But I would suggest that unfortunately, public education will be a part of that look at what the revenue numbers that are driven out for that. Now, as I say that, I'm going to try and sum up my comments with a couple short little stories that I hope will tell you that there is still hope, that public education is on life support. And one of the reasons that I would say that is because we're all in the room, and Senator Brubaker and myself are in the room. You know, it's easy to figure out ways of dodging stuff like this, to be perfectly frank. And this is not necessarily an environment where I would say, yay! You know, I'm going to be addressing this group. But there are difficult issues, and they can be addressed if we're willing to work together. And I would suggest to you that somebody used the term silos and how they're silos. We have got to eliminate the silos, and we have got to recognize we're in this together. And the primary story that I want to tell you is that I was talking about pension reform long before anybody recognized this crisis. I had introduced defined contribution pensions, I think, in 2005. It was long before, in fact, my current state senator at the time told me I was nuts, that the economy, we were going to grow our way out of this problem. No, it wasn't Senator Brubaker, because I was elected prior to him. So, but at the time I was nuts. We were going to grow our way out of this. And I said, no, this is not sustainable. So I was put on a task force that the Republican caucus put together through our policy committee to start to craft pension reform. And what the first thing that we did is we asked the individual stakeholders, people who we knew had a vested interest in the subject, to come in for private meetings behind closed doors and ask them to cooperate with us to help develop solutions. Doesn't that sound like a relatively mature thing to do? So we had this series of meetings, and I won't bring up what transpired at the meeting with the current, in this current environment. But let's say that it was less than cooperative, the first couple meetings. But I will tell you the story about the uniformed police and firefighters come in and talk to them. We saw a presentation from the Economy League on municipal pensions. That's a part of the issue we at the state have to deal with. So in the course of conversations, I finally got so frustrated, I said, please, tell me what a fair pension is. What is an adequate pension? Just tell me the number I got to shoot for a public sector employee. And the answer, it was this guy is like, well, you know. And I said, no, I don't. Tell me what's a fair number. Well, for like 2 minutes. You have know how long 2 minutes can be when you're listening to me? You're learning. He just would not answer. And finally I said, thank you. Thank you for not answering the question. And he got this bewildered look. And I said, because it's a rhetorical question. Because the answer is as much as you can get. And I said, let me share something with you. I represent 60,000 taxpayers. And if I got all 60,000 in a room and I said to them, how much are you willing to pay for a public sector employee for his retirement for the rest of the year? Guess what the answer would be? As little as I can give. I said, so now let me tell you. I got you over here and I got him over here, my taxpayer. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to move you two guys, sorry, I didn't want to hit you upside the head. Move you two guys close enough together that I can figure out how to build a policy bridge. So what are you willing to give me? No answer. We went through 9 months of meetings with no answer. We will give nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, as long as that's the attitude of the public sector unions, the private sector unions, as long as that's the attitude of the taxpayer, you're not going to solve this problem. But when people of mature mentalities recognize that you cannot sink someone else's end of the boat and keep your own afloat, we're not going to solve the problem. So I call on the unions to come to the table. To the PSEA's credit, after a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth, they finally incrementally moved a little bit. Some would say on their side they moved a lot. Have they moved far enough? I think that you notice by the continued unfunded liability, we still have more work to do on the pension issue. But it's not just the pension issue. I'd suggest to my dear friend, Dr. Frick, that the reason the school choice movement has so much momentum is because people are frustrated because the public school system is handcuffed. And they want to try and move their kids to some place where it's not handcuffed. Let's take the handcuffs off. Let's eliminate prevailing wage. Let's let you guys control your own budgets. That's what needs to happen. Those conversations need to happen. As long as we are parochial and we are not willing to work together, we aren't going to solve the problem. And unfortunately, it will be the death. But, today, we start anew and we work together. Maybe on the way out the door, Mr. Testerman and I can lock arms and have another conversation about pensions. Ladies and gentlemen, that ends the diatribe of Scotland.
I'm Mike Licklider. I'm the superintendent of Penn Manor School District, and I have the enviable task of trying to bring this all together, especially after Scott's, what he calls his diatribe there at the end. And you know, I've heard that they say the nightly news is where they start out by saying good evening, and then they proceed for the next 30 minutes to tell you why it really isn't. Well, I think pretty much that's what we've done today for you. So it's my job to tie it all together and to have everyone leaving feeling that at least we have some glimmer of hope because of forums like this, because of the Hourglass forum. And I want to thank Monty again for pulling this together and really pulling together a diverse group of people, because this is the only way we'll solve the problem. Every day, thousands of our children enter public schools, and they look to us, the adults in the community, for hope. And it's our job as public schools to provide hope for all children in the community. And 60 years ago, and this is a picture that I just love, this is a picture from one of our Penn Manor classrooms. And these students who we heard earlier were more concerned about the Cold War and Sputnik and those circumstances came into our room, and they confronted an entirely different set of circumstances than our students have today. Today, these other group of students sit in our classrooms, and they are confronted with this 21st century reality. They're not just competing with students, Penn Manor students aren't just competing with students in Lampter-Strasburg or in Hempfield. They are competing with students around the world, 7 continents. We heard about technology. We know from Thomas Friedman from the New York Times, who wrote the book, The World is Flat, that technology has flattened our world. So we can't just be concerned with our own individual parochial interests. This Berlin Wall fell. These students have no idea what the Berlin Wall is, and they are facing this competition. Now, the other thing we've heard is that our American schools are a reflection of our society, and that is very true. Our schools, the people in our schools, the interest in our schools, they represent the strengths and the areas of need, or the bad things about our society as well. You heard from Marty and from Pedro and from Brenda about some of the mandates that we face in education. Our public schools respond when we're asked to provide vaccines, or to teach about the dangers of drugs, or to teach about the internet and internet safety. And it's essential, amidst all this, that we continue to teach the essentials of our public schools and the academic subjects. We heard from Brenda about Chapter 4 and the academic skills, the basic academic skills that are required in Chapter 4. Well, that's just one chapter of many chapters of mandates that are required from us. At the same time, we know, and we've all heard it, that as schools, we will need to do more with less. Along with this good, we need to accept that our schools respond to issues that we do not always make, and that we need to form some ideas of how to move forward. After the tragedy in Columbine, we responded with legislation to make our schools safer. We also responded with stiffer penalties for students who brought weapons to school. But there are other mandates that we heard about today. We can expel students from school, but at the same time, our public schools must also provide the education for the same students who bring these weapons to schools. Does that make sense to me? No. But it's just one illustration of how there are always two sides of the coin. Schools are focusing more on academic skills. And let me take just a few minutes to give some real-life examples of what I mean by both sides of these coins. No Child Left Behind. Bob talked about it as the earlier iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I think in some ways, No Child Left Behind has produced stronger skills in our schools. And let me give you an example. You see before you a team of our students who competed internationally, won an international title in England this past summer, and recognized just 3 months ago by the President of the United States for their accomplishments. We're very proud of that. We're also proud of another high-profile success we had just last month, where one of our 15-year-old high school seniors, and listen to what I said, a 15-year-old high school senior, won the nation's premier science competition. And this was not just national news, this was international news. It was an accomplishment celebrated around the world. Now, when I speak to parents, and parents of some of the high-profile successes, but also parents of some of our struggling students, and ask, why do you believe in public schools? They give me almost the identical answer. They tell me that our schools must and do respond to every single child who walks through the door. Now, let me tell you about the other side of the coin. No Child Left Behind, Esea, whatever you want to call it, is a good thing. But it also puts accountability on the schools, and I, for one, am also well open to accountability, and I welcome the competition of other schools. We have various subgroups because of the size of our school, because of the legislation. If you have 40 or more students in one of these subgroups, then you are accountable not just for the performance of your entire school, but also that specific group of 40 students or more. Some schools in Pennsylvania don't have 40 students, therefore they are not subject to these same requirements. If you talk to Pedro, he probably has I know he has the most subgroups of any school district in Lancaster County. Now, economically distressed students, we have more than 40 of them. Because we did not meet the target for these 40 students, we are now considered this year, Penn Manor High School, as a school that is on corrective action. Now, how many people here, and I know I have some school board members I can rely on not to raise their hand, how many people here would label Penn Manor School District as a failing school? Okay, you're being a good audience and not raising your hand. But I am proud of what we've accomplished. I'm also not using that as an excuse and saying that we can't and shouldn't work harder and that our teachers aren't on a daily basis working harder. Now, would you also believe, Pedro said earlier that the school district of Lancaster has over 100 homeless students? We have nearly 50 homeless students in Penn Manor School District. I know, I just told that fact to someone this morning as I was reviewing my talk for today, but that's surprising that we have that level of poverty in the Millersville area. Now, over the years, the expectations that we've heard, eloquently illustrated in Bob's eulogy, have grown. And the way I compare this is I compare the expectations to the jump ahead a little bit here. I compare these expectations to the premium cable television that we have in our homes. And I can tell you what, channel 115. Anybody ever watch channel 115? Channel 115 is A&E's biography channel. I heard Bob say that. Yes. Now, I love the biography channel. When I turn it on and start to watch it, and either my son or one of my two daughters or my wife walks in the room, they have a fit because they can't stand watching that same channel. I love it. In fact, I think we should have, like we have C-SPAN, C-SPAN 2, C-SPAN 3, I think we should have 3 biography channels. But you know what? There's not a demand for it. Just because I want it, there's not a demand for it. And my wife says, well, I let you watch the History Channel. Isn't that enough? Why do you want more? Well, that's how it is for our public schools. There's not virtually a need that doesn't go met on a daily basis. And we are at the point where we can no longer afford our system of premium cable. I'm a school leader, and I will tell you that that is very much the case. Now, we need more in schools than what was referred to earlier in the talk as the basic dial. I love this picture.
I do too.
I remember this television. Some of you may think I'm a young guy, but I'm not that young that I don't remember this television. Well, I grew up in New York City, and I don't think we had color television until I was in middle school, so I think my dad was a little cheap with that. But we also can't afford to go back to the public schools of yesteryear where we only had 12 channels. And let me tell you another example. We talked about the mandate of special ed. I have a few classes in my school district that have severely challenged, learning disabled, mentally challenged students in them. Those classrooms each cost me over $350,000. Am I saying that we should go back to a point where we did not provide for those children? And there was a time where we kicked them out of school, they did not make it. We can't do that. But at the same time, we have to find as a group of citizens the middle ground between this television set, this basic cable, and the premium that we've gotten used to as a school system and also as a society. Now, this goes to our two friends in the room who are legislators. Over 200 years ago, a group of citizens met together, and they met together in Philadelphia. They locked themselves into a room in Independence Hall. I doubt they have air conditioning. Scott, do you have air conditioning in the House chamber?
It's rather chilly, actually.
It's a little too cold there. But they met, they put aside their individual differences, and they all had their own ideas of what our country should be. They locked themselves in a room, and they didn't come out until they had an agreement, and that framework has guided them for 200 years. I don't want to see us going to the point where I have to ask in 5 years Bob to come out of retirement and come to Penn Manor to deliver the same eulogy he did today. So as we leave here today, we need to realize that we face these challenges and we have to work together to advance schools, public schools, knowing that earlier what Monty told us that we can't afford to wait for the solution. And the current movie is waiting for Superman. There is no Superman coming. We can't afford to wait for the voucher or charter schools. We know that the private schools, as good as they are in Lancaster and around the country, can't solve all of our problems and can't address all of the needs that we face in the classroom. But at the same time, we have to depend on that system of public education that we have. As we're doing this, we each have to set aside our differences, and I think this panel represented a good group of various interests, the silos. We have to set them aside. The other thing we have to be careful to do as we go forward from here, which I've seen happening already and has concerned me, is that we don't demonize any particular group of either parent advocates, students, employees, and particularly we can't demonize our teachers and blame them for any one particular ill. We are all to blame for the system the way it is. We have all asked for more premium cable television sets and more channels, and we have to be willing to put those differences aside, work together, and make sure that as we talk, as we get together, as we try to find a solution, that it addresses the needs so that the children that you see before us, our children, our grandchildren, will have the system that they need, the system they deserve, and the system that guarantees that all children in Lancaster County, the Commonwealth, and this country will have the education available to them that we had as kids ourselves. So thank you very much. Again, thank you to Monty and to the Hourglass Forum for putting this together. And I hope I was able to pull together all those threads for us tonight. So thank you.
I know you see the agenda, but Hourglass had to make a decision. These outstanding speakers, we wanted them to make their speeches, take a little more time than we planned. So as a result, we're going to pass on the formal handing out and proposing questions and suggest, since all these speakers will be available during the next 30 minutes of reception, that you talk to them as you've already started talking to several of them about what they've discussed. I would like to thank the outstanding group of people that presented. We are so fortunate in this community to have this quality of people that are willing to address this issue, to provide you with a diverse look at our schools. I want to thank you folks for coming and caring so much about the schools. A Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 6 is not an ideal time, and I really appreciate your concern and I know what you will do in the coming weeks and years to try to take into account and to act on what you've heard. I'd like to thank the Lancaster County Community Foundation for helping sponsor this, as well as 2 anonymous donors. And again, thank you very much for attending. There's a reception in the back where we had cookies and drinks, and I think it'll be a little more substantial now. Thanks again.